The air in the Las Vegas showroom was thick with anticipation even during rehearsal. It was late afternoon, the golden hour light trying to push through the heavy velvet curtains, but inside the stage lights already blazed, making every speck of dust dance. Sarah, barely 22 and still pinching herself that she was actually here, stood at her microphone, one of the Sweet Inspirations' backup singers. Her heart thumped a nervous rhythm against her ribs. This was Elvis Presley. He walked onto the stage, not with a grand entrance, but with a quiet, confident stride that somehow still filled the enormous room. His famous dark hair was slicked back, a few strands escaping, and he wore a simple black leisure suit, far from the rhinestones and capes of his nighttime show, but still radiating a magnetic energy. He nodded to the band, a quiet, "All right, boys," and then turned to the vocalists with a warm, easy smile that made Sarah's breath, he said, his voice a low rumble. "Let's run through a few, get warmed up. How about Suspicious Minds first?" The band kicked in, and the rehearsal was everything Sarah had dreamed of. Elvis was a perfectionist, but he was also incredibly generous, guiding them, laughing with them, his voice a powerful, resonant instrument that filled every corner of the vast space. He moved with that fluid grace even in rehearsal, throwing in a casual karate chop, here and there a hip swivel that still sent shivers through the few stagehands milling about. Sarah found herself grinning, lost in the pure joy of making music with a legend. This was it. This was the dream. They moved through a few more hits. Burning Love, a powerful American Troy that gave Sarah goosebumps, and a soulful rendition of Love Me Tender. "All right," he said, his voice a little softer now. "Let's try something different. A gospel number." He looked at the musical director, Joe Guercio, and then back at the band. "How about Peace in the Valley?" A quiet ripple went through the musicians. Sarah noticed a few of the older band members exchange a quick glance, a subtle shift in their posture. It was barely noticeable, but Sarah, with her heightened awareness as a nungi, picked up on it. She looked at Estelle, one of the more seasoned backup singers, who simply looked at her with a gentle, almost sad expression, a silent warning. The opening chords began slow and reverent. It was a beautiful, simple melody, full of hope and longing. Sarah knew the song, a classic gospel hymn. She stood ready to join in, her voice prepared to blend with the Sweet Inspirations' harmonies. Elvis brought the microphone to his lips. He started singing, his voice a low, tender whisper that was almost a prayer. "Well, I'm tired and so weary, but I must travel on." His voice was pure, filled with an emotion that transcended the rehearsal setting. It wasn't a performance, it was raw feeling, and then it happened. His voice cracked, not just a little, but a full, painful break. His eyes, which had been closed, fluttered open, and Sarah saw them. They were shimmering wet. A tear escaped and slowly tracked a path down his cheek. He tried to sing the next line, but his breath hitched. Closed his eyes again, his hand gripping the microphone. Stand so tightly his knuckles turned white, his shoulders sagged. The band, seeing his distress, softened the music, almost stopping. "Lord, let me walk in." He couldn't finish the line. He pulled the microphone away, turning his back slightly to the room. He wiped his eyes roughly with the back of his hand, but it was no use. More tears were coming. The music faded to silence. The room was utterly still. No one dared to speak. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She had never seen anyone, let alone someone as powerful as Elvis Presley, look so utterly vulnerable. He stood there for a long moment, his back to them, taking deep, shuddering breaths. When he finally turned around, his eyes were still red-rimmed, but he had composed himself, at least outwardly. He offered a strained, apologetic smile. "All right, fellas and ladies," he said, his voice hoarse but regaining some of its usual charm. "That's enough for today. My apologies. Just not quite feeling that one today." He gave a small, self-deprecating shrug. "Go on, get some rest, see you tonight." And with that, he walked off the stage, disappearing through a side door. leaving behind a bewildered silence. Sarah stood frozen, watching the empty space where he had been. Her initial shock gave way to a surge of questions. What had just happened? Why, that song? Estelle sighed, a sad, knowing sound. That song, Sarah, she said softly, her eyes distant. It's always been difficult for him, a very personal one. She didn't elaborate, just gave Sarah's arm a squeeze. Come on, let's get some dinner. She walked off the stage. The unsettling image of Elvis, the mighty king brought to his knees by a simple hymn, burned into her mind. The glittering facade of fame had cracked, and for a fleeting moment she had seen the raw, aching humanity beneath. What was it about peace in the valley that held such power over him? It was a question that would linger in her mind, a captivating mystery she felt compelled to understand. The year was 1937, and the world was a very different place in Tupelo, Mississippi. For a 5-year-old boy named Elvis Aaron Presley, his world was small, centered around a tiny 2-room shotgun shack on Old Saltillo Road. Money was a word he didn't fully understand, but he knew its absence. He knew the feeling of an empty stomach, the threadbare clothes, the worn-out shoes. But he also knew the boundless warmth of his mother's love, a love so deep it could make the little shack feel like a palace. Gladys Presley was a woman woven from grit and grace. Her hands, though calloused from endless work, were always gentle when they smoothed his hair or held his small hand. Her eyes, often tired, sparkled with an unbreakable spirit when she looked at her only surviving child. To Elvis, she wasn't just his mother, she was his entire universe, his protector, his confidant, his first and most important teacher. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and soft purples, Gladys would gather Elvis close. Sometimes they'd be sitting on the small rickety porch swing, listening to the crickets chirp their nightly song. Other times they'd be inside by the dim glow of a single lamp after Vernon, his father, had finished his meager supper and gone to rest. These were the moments Elvis cherished most. "Come here, baby," Gladys would murmur, her voice soft as a summer breeze, pulling him onto her lap even though he was getting a little too big. He'd rest his head against her chest, listening to the steady beat of her heart, a rhythm that was as comforting as any lullaby, and then she would sing. She didn't have a trained voice, but it was pure and true, filled with a soulful conviction that reached deep into Elvis's young heart. She sang hymns mostly, songs of faith and hope that had been passed down through generations. One song in particular was her favorite. It was a hymn they often sang in church, but Gladys made it her own, infusing it with all her dreams for a better life, for peace, for her precious boy. "Well, I'm tired and so weary, but I must travel on," she would begin, her voice a gentle hum. "Till the Lord comes to call me away." Elvis would close his eyes, picturing the world she sang about. A world where there were no more troubles, no more struggles, no more tears, where the wicked shall cease from troubling and the weary shall find rest. He didn't fully grasp the theological depth of the lyrics, but he understood the feeling. He understood the promise of peace. He understood the comfort it brought his mother, and through her it brought comfort to him. She would hold him tighter as she sang, sometimes rocking him gently. "And I want to go to that land where sorrow has no end." Her voice would sometimes catch on that line, a quiet sadness for the hardships they faced. But then she'd breathe in deep, and her voice would rise, filled with renewed hope, "and live in peace in that valley where joys will never end." That phrase, "peace in that valley," became a beacon for young Elvis. It was more than just a place in a song. When the landlord threatened eviction, when their cupboards were bare, when his father was out of work, Gladys would sing "Peace in the Valley." And for a little while, the weight of the world would lift. It was her way of telling him that no matter how hard things got, there was always hope, always a place of refuge, a place where their spirits could find rest. He would sometimes try to hum along, his small voice echoing hers. She would smile, her eyes shining with pride. "That's right, baby, sing it with Mama." And he would. His first lessons in music, his first understanding of its power, came from those quiet evenings, nestled in his mother's arms, listening to her sing of a valley filled with peace. The song became etched into his very being, an inseparable part of his earliest memories, a lullaby of hope sung by the woman who was the anchor of his young life. It was more than a song. It was a prayer, a bond, a sacred promise whispered between a mother and her son in the fading light of a Tupelo evening. As Elvis grew, moving from the tiny shack in Tupelo to the slightly less precarious existence in Memphis, the song "Peace in the Valley" remained the quiet heartbeat of his connection with his mother. He was no longer a toddler nestled on her lap, but a lean, restless boy, brimming with an energy that seemed too big for their cramped apartment. He was discovering his own voice, experimenting with sounds he heard on Beale Street, the blues, the gospel, the burgeoning rhythm and blues. But Peace in the Valley was different. It wasn't about performance, it was about soul. Gladys continued to be his greatest champion, her belief in him unwavering. She saw the spark, the passion for music that burned within him. Every Sunday, they would walk to the Assembly of God. Church Elvis dressed in his best, often hand-me-down, clothes. The church was a vibrant place filled with fervent prayers and joyous, soulful singing. It was here, surrounded by the powerful communal voices, that Elvis truly began to understand the power of gospel music. He would listen intently, his eyes fixed on the choir, his body swaying with the rhythm, and then he would join in. His voice still boyish, but already possessing a surprising depth. Rising with the congregation, Gladys would sit beside him, her hand often resting on his arm, her eyes shining with pride. She saw his future, perhaps not as a world-famous singer, but certainly as a man who could touch hearts with his voice. During these church services, "Peace in the Valley" was a regular hymn. When the congregation began to sing it, Gladys would always lean closer to Elvis, a shared smile passing between them. Their voices would blend, her pure, unadorned, alto intertwining with his budding tenor. It wasn't just a song they sang, it was their psalm, a private language of shared faith and simple, profound dreams. There were times when life tested them severely. Elvis remembered a particularly harsh winter in Memphis. Cold seemed to seep into their very bones, and his father Vernon struggled to find steady work. Food was scarce, and the landlord's threats became louder, more insistent. The air in their small apartment felt heavy with worry and unspoken fears. One evening, after a particularly bleak day, Elvis found his mother sitting quietly by the window, staring out at the gray rain-streaked street. Her shoulders were slumped, and for the first time he saw the usually indomitable Gladys look truly defeated. He sat down beside her, not knowing what to say. Feeling the helplessness that comes with childhood poverty, she turned to him, her eyes clouded with unshed tears. "Oh, baby," she whispered, her voice rough with emotion. "Sometimes it just feels like we're never gonna catch a break." Elvis, young as he was, knew what she meant. He saw the weariness in her face, the lines of worry etched around her eyes. He wanted to make it better, but he didn't know how. Then almost instinctively Gladys began to hum. It was faint at first, barely a whisper, but Elvis recognized the tune instantly. "Peace in the Valley." She began to sing softly, her voice gaining strength with each word. "Well, I'm tired, and so weary, but I must travel on, till the Lord comes to call me away." As she sang, something shifted. The lines of worry on her face softened. Her posture straightened, almost imperceptibly. The song wasn't just a comfort anymore. It was an act of defiance against despair. It was a declaration of faith, a profound trust that things would eventually get better, that peace awaited them even if it was in a spiritual valley. Elvis joined in, his voice small but earnest. They sang it together, huddled on the worn sofa, the simple melody filling the silent, cold apartment. By the time they reached the final verse, a sense of calm had settled over them. The rain still fell outside, and their situation hadn't magically changed, but the overwhelming sense of hopelessness had receded. "See, baby?" Gladys murmured, her arm wrapping around him. "We always got that peace deep inside. Nobody can take that away, not the landlord, not the cold, not nobody." From that day on, Peace in the Valley was more than just a song. It was a lifeline. It was a secret weapon against the harsh realities of their life. It was the enduring echo of his mother's faith and her unwavering love. Solidified in Elvis's mind that music wasn't just entertainment. It was solace, a powerful conduit for hope and resilience. It was the sound of his mother's unwavering heart, a sound he would carry with him forever, etched into the very fabric of his soul. The years flew by in a dizzying blur. For Elvis, the humble beginnings in Tupelo and Memphis seemed to fade into a distant, almost dreamlike past, replaced by the roar of crowds, the flash of cameras, and the relentless hum of a record player. By his early 20s, Elvis Presley was no longer just a boy who sang with his mother in church. He was a phenomenon, a force of nature, rocking the world with his raw talent. He walked into Sun Records in Memphis, drawn by the allure of making a record, a small dream that would quickly explode into something far grander than he could ever imagine. Sam Phillips, the visionary owner, heard something in Elvis's voice, a blend of country blues and gospel that was unlike anything else. The first sessions were electric, spontaneous, a creative eruption. Songs like "That's All Right" and "Blue Moon of Kentucky" burst forth, signaling the birth of a new sound, a new era. Elvis was a whirlwind of energy. On stage, hips swiveling, legs trembling, a melodic explosion that captivated audiences and shocked polite society. He was singing about love and heartbreak, about fast cars and freedom. His music was raw, exciting, and dangerous. It was everything Peace in the Valley was not. Peace in the Valley remained a private comfort, a quiet whisper from his past. He never thought to bring it to Sam Phillips. It felt too sacred, too personal for the wild, untamed world of rock and roll he was forging. It was a song of inner peace, of spiritual longing, not of rebellious youth or romantic yearning. It was kept tucked away, a secret solace reserved for moments of quiet reflection, or perhaps a soft hum when he missed his mother during long stretches. Away from home, she would sit in the audience often, with Vernon watching her son, the boy she'd cradled and sung to transform into a global sensation. She loved his rock and roll, the energy and joy he brought to so many, but she also understood the cost. The endless touring, the constant demands, the way fame seemed to slowly chip away at the quiet moments they once shared. Sometimes, when Elvis managed to steal a few hours at home, away from the demanding glare of the spotlight, he would find himself in the living room with Gladys. He might pick up his guitar, not to practice a new rock and roll riff, but to strum a familiar gospel chord. In those moments, he might softly sing a verse or two of Peace in the Valley just for her. Gladys would close her eyes, a soft smile on her face. Her hand would reach out, finding his a silent acknowledgement of the enduring bond, a reaffirmation of their shared sanctuary. It was in these hushed moments that Elvis felt most like himself, the Tupelo boy, before the roar of the crowd swallowed him whole. Then came Colonel Tom Parker. A shrewd, calculating manager, Parker saw Elvis not just as a singer, but as a brand, a product to be molded and marketed to an unprecedented degree. Colonel had a grand vision for Elvis, one that involved movies, TV specials, and massive record sales. There was little room for personal spiritual hymns in this grand plan, not in the public eye at least. Everything was about projection, about the image of the unstoppable king. "Son, we got a meeting out of your hand with this rock and roll. the colonel would boom, his cigar smoke filling the air. "Stick to what they want? Leave the church songs for Sunday morning service, eh?" Elvis, though instinctively drawn to the spiritual side of his music, understood the colonel's logic. He was at the beginning of an incredible journey, and the path was being laid out by this powerful man. So he compartmentalized. The rock and roll was for the world, for the millions of screaming fans. The gospel music, the spiritual connection, and especially Peace in the Valley, remained a sacred, private space. He would release gospel albums eventually, and they would be critically acclaimed, winning him Grammys. But even then, Peace in the Valley was often approached with a certain reverence, a careful distance. It was still too close, too entwined with the core of who he was, the boy who learned faith and hope from his mother in a humble shack. The stark contrast between the wild, hip-shaking public persona and the deeply spiritual private man was becoming more pronounced. The song, in its quiet power, stood as a testament to the latter, a constant echo of his origins, a reminder of the peace he always sought, even amidst the escalating chaos of unparalleled fame. The year 1958 was a turning point for Elvis, a seismic shift that would forever alter the landscape of his life. He was serving in the U.S. Army, stationed in Germany, fulfilling his duty to his country. The fame, the screaming crowds, the movie sets, all of it was put on hold, replaced by the disciplined routine of military life. It was a time of forced reflection, a period where the noise of his superstar existence was momentarily silenced. He missed home. He missed his family, particularly his mother. Gladys had always been the emotional anchor of his life, the unwavering source of love and comfort. He wrote to her, frequently called whenever he could, clinging to every word, every whisper of her familiar voice. She was always there, a constant presence in his heart, even across an ocean then. The world tilted on its axis. The call came through crackling across the transatlantic line, bringing with it the most devastating news he could ever imagine. His mother, Gladys, was gravely ill. Pneumonia. Her health had been fragile for a while, exacerbated by her emotional struggles with his fame and absence. Elvis, frantic, immediately secured emergency leave. The journey home was a blur of frantic thoughts, a desperate prayer that he would make it in time. He didn't. He arrived back in Memphis, but it was too late. Gladys, love. Presley had passed away on August 14, 1958, at the age of 46. The world went dark. The vibrant colors of his life drained into a monochrome of profound grief. The king, the idol of millions, was just a son lost and heartbroken. The funeral was a blur of faces, hushed whispers, and the unbearable weight of loss. He wept openly, unashamedly, clinging to his father Vernon, in shared sorrow. It was during these dark days that Peace in the Valley ceased to be just a comforting hymn or a private solace. It became a wrenching lament, a raw cry of a heart torn asunder. Every lyric, once a promise of comfort, now twisted into a sharp reminder of his loss. He stood by her grave, the finality of it all, crushing him. He remembered her singing the song, rocking him gently, promising a world where sorrow had no end. Now sorrow felt like his only companion. A few days after the funeral, in the quiet, grief-stricken stillness of Graceland, a small gathering of close family and friends came together. Someone quietly suggested a hymn, perhaps to bring some peace to the heavy atmosphere. A musician present, seeing Elvis's devastated state, softly began the opening chords of Peace in the Valley. Elvis froze. The notes, once so comforting, now pierced him like shards of glass. He saw his mother's face, heard her voice, clear as day, singing to him in Tupelo. He felt her arms around him, her gentle touch. The memory was too vivid, too real, too agonizingly absent. He wanted to sing, to connect with her, to find the promised peace. But the grief was too overwhelming, a tsunami of pain that crashed over him, drowning out all sound. His voice broke, his body shook with uncontrollable sobs. He couldn't get past the first line. The words were trapped in his throat, suffocated by tears. Clutched his chest, gasping for air, the anguish too profound to bear. His father, Vernon, quickly came to his side, wrapping an arm around him. "It's all right, son," he murmured, his own voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to." Elvis stumbled away from the makeshift music, collapsing onto a nearby couch, burying his face in his hands. The song, meant to bring solace, had instead unleashed a torrent of unbearable memories and inconsolable grief. It was the sound of his mother's love, and now it was the sound of her absence. From that day forward, the song became a raw nerve. He couldn't hear it without feeling the phantom embrace of his mother, the crushing weight of her loss. It was too painful, too intimate, too deeply entwined with the core of his grief. He would sing other gospel songs, finding comfort in many of them, but Peace in the Valley was different. It was the song that held the echo of her voice and the haunting emptiness of her silence. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that performing it live, exposing that raw wound to the world, would be an impossible feat. It would be like tearing open his heart on stage. A vulnerability he couldn't or wouldn't allow himself to show the world, demanded Elvis Presley back. The army service ended, and the colonel, ever the impresario, had already laid out his grand plan for Elvis's triumphant return. Movies, records, television appearances. The machine was in full swing, but the man who returned from Germany was fundamentally changed. Playful swagger was still there, the iconic smile, but beneath it lay a profound, unhealed wound. Gladys was gone, and a part of Elvis had gone with her. He threw himself into his work, perhaps as a way to outrun the grief. He made movies one after another, churning out soundtracks, touring when he could. He was diligent, professional, but often a deep melancholy shadowed his eyes. He'd spend hours alone in Graceland, roaming the halls of the home his mother had loved. The silence amplifying her absence, musically he continued to explore his gospel roots. Recording critically acclaimed albums like His Hand in Mine, he found solace in these songs of faith, hymns that spoke of a higher power and a peace beyond understanding. He could sing, "How Great Thou Art," with incredible power and devotion, his voice resonating with deep spiritual conviction. But Peace in the Valley remained off limits, a forbidden melody. If the song was ever suggested during a recording session or brought up by a musician during a casual jam session, Elvis would politely but firmly shut it down. "Not that one, fellas," he'd say, his voice losing its usual warmth. "Let's move on." Or he'd change the subject abruptly, a subtle tension entering his posture. His inner circle, those who had known him for years, like Joe Esposito and the Memphis Mafia, understood. They knew the depth of his devotion to Gladys and the profound, almost paralyzing grief her death had caused. They protected him from the song, subtly altering set lists, guiding conversations away from it. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of filming, Elvis sat with Jill Esposito on the porch of Graceland, watching the stars emerge over the quiet lawns. Conversation turned to the old days, to Tupelo, to Gladys. Elvis sighed a heavy, weary sound. "You know, Joe," he said, his voice low, "Mama loved Peace in the Valley more than any song. She used to sing it to me every night, said it was a prayer for our peace." He paused, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "I try to sing it sometimes, you know, just for myself, but it just rips me apart." Joe nodded, understanding. "She'd be proud of you, E. She'd understand some songs are just too close to the heart." "It's not just the sadness," Elvis continued, his voice tinged with a familiar pain. "It's the feeling that I let her down, somehow, that I didn't get her to that valley of peace. Not really, not in life." His voice cracked slightly. "And now she's gone. And all I hear when I sing it is her voice, and then nothing." He never really spoke about it in such direct terms again, but the sentiment lingered. The song was a constant reminder of his greatest loss, a raw wound that refused to heal. The beautiful promise of the lyrics was overshadowed by the personal tragedy they represent. It wasn't just a song of sorrow, but of an enduring ache, a longing for a past that could never be reclaimed. The public saw the superstar, the vibrant performer, the Mizot movie star. They saw the dazzling costumes and the powerful voice. Few truly understood the quiet battle raging within him, the depth of his personal pain, or the significance of a single gospel hymn that could bring the king of rock and roll to his knees. The mystery of the song's hold over him remained largely unseen, a hidden struggle beneath the glittering facade of his public life. And so, as the 1960s turned into the 1970s, and Elvis entered his iconic Las Vegas residency era, Peace in the Valley remained a ghost in his repertoire. It was a song he loved deeply, profoundly, but one he could barely touch, let alone perform. It held too many echoes, too many tears, too many memories of a love lost and a peace that felt forever out of reach. It was a haunting melody, a constant reminder of the valley of shadows he walked through long after the sun had set on his earliest, most cherished connection. Back in the glittering, bustling world of 1970s Las Vegas, Sarah couldn't shake the image of Elvis Presley's raw vulnerability during that rehearsal. The way he had crumpled the tears in his eyes. It was so contrary to the powerful, self-assured image he projected on stage every night. The show they performed that night was phenomenal, Elvis captivating the audience with every move, every note. But even then, Sarah found herself watching him more closely, looking for hidden cues, subtle signs of the human beneath the legend. During breaks, when the band wasn't rehearsing and the dressing rooms buzzed with chatter, Sarah found herself drawn to the older musicians and crew members. They were the veterans, the ones who had been with Elvis for years, some even from his early days. They held the stories, the answers to the unspoken question. She started subtly, trying not to seem too nosy, but her genuine curiosity shone through. One afternoon, during a quiet moment in the lounge area, she approached Estelle. That one always does. "It's his mama's song," Sarah leaned in. "His mother? What do you mean?" "Gladys," Estelle explained, her gaze distant as if looking back through time. He adored her. She was his whole world, everything he did for her, and she was a deeply spiritual woman. That song, Peace in the Valley, it was her favorite. They used to sing it together all the time when he was just a little boy in Tupelo. Before all this, she gestured around the luxurious showroom with a sweep of her hand. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She sang it to him? "Every night I heard," Estelle confirmed. It was like her lullaby to him, her prayer for him. And when she passed, well, that's when it became impossible for him to sing it. It's just too painful, too many memories. Another time, Sarah found herself chatting with James Burton, the legendary lead guitarist. James, usually a man of few words, had a quiet respect for Elvis. Sarah brought up the topic, mentioning the rehearsal. James nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's a tough one for him. He loved his mama more than anything. I remember him saying after she died that he felt like he'd lost half his soul. That song, it just brings it all back for him. The good times, the hard times, and then the grief. He can sing anything, Sarah. Anything but that one. It's a piece of his heart he can't quite share without breaking." The snippets of information slowly began to form a clearer picture in Sarah's mind. She started to understand the weight Elvis carried, the profound human experience of grief that lurked beneath the dazzling showmanship. It wasn't just a superstar having an off day. It was a son wrestling with the ghost of his beloved mother. A memory so potent it could bring him to tears in an instant. Watching him on stage during subsequent shows, Sarah saw him through new eyes. When he sang a powerful gospel number like "Why Me, Lord," she noticed a particular intensity in his gaze, a quiet reverence that went beyond performance. She imagined him as a young boy singing with his mother in a humble church, dreaming of a better life. The glitzy jumpsuits, the adoring fans, the flashing lights, all of it seemed to fade, revealing the vulnerable, deeply spiritual man beneath. Her initial awe for his fame transformed into a profound empathy for his human struggle. The king was not just an untouchable icon. He was a man who had loved deeply and lost profoundly. He was living proof that even the most powerful among us could be touched by the deepest human emotions. Sarah realized that the difficulty with Peace in the Valley wasn't a weakness but a testament to the depth of his love for his mother. It was a silent monument to a bond that death couldn't fully sever. And as she sang her harmonies each night, blending her voice with his, she felt a deeper connection to the legend standing before her, understanding that the raw vulnerability she witnessed was perhaps the most honest, most captivating performance of all. Her quest for understanding had led her not just to a story, but to a profound insight into the heart of the king. Days turned into a week in Las Vegas, the rhythm of shows and rehearsals a constant thrum. Elvis, outwardly, was the same mid king. But Sarah, with her newfound insight, could sense a subtle change. He was still professional, still dazzling, but there was a quiet thoughtfulness about him, a searching look in his eyes that she hadn't noticed before. He'd often linger on stage after rehearsals, long after everyone else had packed up, staring out at the empty seats, lost in thought. One afternoon, a moment of profound clarity seemed to settle upon him. He had been listening to a gospel radio station in his dressing room, the soulful melodies washing over him. A children's choir came on, singing a simple, pure version of a familiar hymn. And something clicked. He saw a flash of his own childhood, heard the clear, sweet voice of his mother. He remembered the feeling of her hand in his, her unwavering faith. The peace she had always promised even in the hardest times. Peace in the Valley. The name of the song whispered through his mind. For so long it had been a source of agony, a painful reminder of loss. But as he sat there, listening to the innocent voices of the children, he realized something profound. The song wasn't just about grief. It was about hope. It was about his mother's enduring love, her spirit that lived on within him. It was a testament to the solace she had found in faith, a solace she had passed on to him. He had avoided the song, fearing its power to shatter him. But what if he wondered its power could also be to heal? What if performing it, truly performing it, could be a way to honor her not just in sorrow but in triumph, to share that enduring hope, that promise of peace with the very people who had come to see him, who perhaps needed that hope as much as he did. The internal debate raged within him. The fear was immense. The memory of his last attempt, the breakdown at rehearsal, still haunted him. What if he couldn't do it? What if he fell apart on stage in front of thousands of people, exposing a vulnerability he had guarded for so long? The colonel would be furious. The press would feast on it. But a deeper part of him, the boy from Tupelo, the son of Gladys, yearned for release, for catharsis. He felt a spiritual imperative, a need to reclaim their song, to make it not just a private lament, but a public declaration of faith and enduring love. He stood up, the decision firming in his mind. He would face it. He would sing Peace in the Valley. Later that day, as the band was wrapping up, Elvis called over Joe Guercio, his musical director. Joe, a calm and steady presence, immediately sensed the change in Elvis's demeanor. "Joe," Elvis said, his voice surprisingly steady, though a tremor of emotion still lay beneath it. "For tomorrow night's show, I want to add Peace in the Valley to the set list." Joe's eyebrows shot up. He looked at Elvis, searching his eyes. He knew the history, the pain. "Elvis, are you sure?" he asked. Concern etched on his face. It's a powerful one." "I know," Elvis said, a faint, determined smile touching his lips. "But I think it's time. I need to sing it for her." He gestured vaguely upward. "Deech. And maybe someone out there needs to hear it too." Joe understood. This wasn't a whim. It was a profound personal decision. "All right, Elvis," he said, a note of respect in his voice. We'll make it happen. You just take your time. We'll be right there with you." Sarah, who had been quietly putting away her music sheets nearby, overheard the conversation. Her heart leaped into her throat. She knew what this meant. The air crackled with unspoken tension and profound significance. The king was going to confront his ghosts on stage in front of the world. A wave of anticipation mixed with a deep, almost maternal protectiveness washed over her. She knew, perhaps better than anyone else in that room, the courage it would take. The stage was set for a monumental moment, public display of the king's most private heart. The showroom was packed a sea of expectant faces, glittering with the excitement of a Las Vegas night. The show was in full swing, a dazzling spectacle of music, energy, and pure charisma. Elvis was in magnificent form, commanding the stage, his voice powerful, his movements fluid, drawing cheers and screams with every hip swivel and vocal flourish. The sweet inspirations, including Sarah, soared with him, their harmonies adding depth and richness to every psalm. Then, as the show neared its end, after a rousing medley of hits and a heartfelt "Can't Help Falling in Love," Elvis paused. The lights softened, casting a warm, intimate glow over the stage. A hush fell over the audience, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Elvis took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the crowd, then closing for a brief moment, he brought the microphone to his lips, his voice softer, more vulnerable than it had been all night. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice tinged with emotion, I want to sing a song for you tonight. A very special song. It's a song my mother used to sing to me when I was a boy. A song of hope, of peace, and of faith." He paused, and Sarah could see his hand tremble slightly on the microphone stand. He opened his eyes, and they looked misty, but determined. "This is Peace in the Valley." A ripple went through the audience. Some leaned forward, sensing the profound significance of the moment. Others, familiar with the whispers of Elvis's deep bond with his mother, exchanged knowing glances. On stage, the band, led by Joe Garcio, began the gentle, reverent opening chords. Sarah took her place, her throat tight with emotion. She watched Elvis, her heart pounding in sync with the slow, deliberate rhythm of the music. He began to sing, his voice a tender whisper that seemed to fill every corner of the vast room, reaching into the deepest parts of their souls. "Well, I'm tired and so weary, but I must travel on." His voice wavered on the first few words, just as it had in rehearsal. His eyes welled up instantly, and a single tear escaped, tracing a path down his cheek. Closed his eyes, the memories flooding back in a powerful torrent, the tiny shack in Tupelo, his mother's loving embrace, the feel of her hand in his, the sound of her voice promising a better day. It was all there, vivid and raw. For a moment, Sarah thought he might falter, might stop just like before. She saw the struggle on his face, the profound grief threatening to overwhelm him. The band held steady, their music, a soft, unwavering support. The audience was completely silent, captivated by the raw display of emotion, but this time something was different. This time Elvis pushed through. He took a shaky breath, his shoulders squaring. He leaned into the microphone, channeling the pain, the love, the longing into every note. The tears still flowed, but his voice, though still tinged with sorrow, gained strength. It wasn't just a lament anymore. It was a prayer, a testament, a deep, resonant cry from the heart, where the wicked shall cease from troubling and the weary shall find rest. He opened his eyes, now gleaming with unshed tears, but also with an incredible light. He looked out at the audience, truly, seeing them, sharing his vulnerability, his hope. The pain was still present, undeniably so, but it was interwoven with a profound sense of peace. He wasn't just singing the words, he was living them, sharing his journey of finding solace in the midst of sorrow. Sarah, standing behind him, felt the power of the moment wash over her. She saw not just the superstar, but the courageous man bearing his soul. She joined in on the harmonies, her voice blending with Estelle and Marnina, forming a gentle cradle of sound for Elvis's lead. There were tears in the eyes of many in the audience. Not just fans, but people touched by his genuine emotion, by the shared human experience of loss and the universal longing for peace. He finished the song, his voice rising to a powerful, resonant climax on the final lines. and live in peace in that valley where joys will never end. The final note hung in the air, vibrating with raw emotion, then slowly faded. For a long moment there was silence. Then, slowly at first, a single clap, then another, then a roar. The audience rose to its feet, a thunderous standing ovation that wasn't just for the flawless performance but for the profound courage and honesty Elvis Presley had just displayed. It was a standing ovation for the man, for his journey, and for the triumph of his spirit over profound grief. Elvis stood there, exhausted, but also undeniably lighter, a sense of quiet triumph settling over him. He wiped the tears from his eyes, a small, genuine smile gracing his lips. He had done it. He had walked through the valley and found peace. The final notes of Peace in the Valley had faded, but their echo resonated long after the last applause had died down. Backstage, the usual post. Show buzz was muted, replaced by a sense of awe and quiet respect. Everyone from the roadies to the seasoned musicians knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, a moment that transcended entertainment. Elvis, though physically drained, felt a profound sense of relief, a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. He walked off stage, his eyes still red-rimmed, but his steps lighter. He greeted a few of his closest people. A quiet thank you in a voice still hoarse with emotion. He didn't rush to his dressing room. Instead, he lingered by the stage entrance, taking deep, steadying breaths. Sarah, still reeling from the emotional impact of the performance, saw him there. She wanted to say something, anything but words, felt inadequate. She simply approached him, a respectful distance away, and offered a soft, genuine smile. Elvis turned his gaze, meeting hers. He didn't say anything for a moment, just studied her face. Then a flicker of understanding, a quiet gratitude passed between them. He gave her a small, tired, but incredibly genuine smile back. "Thank you, Sarah," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. For everything, he didn't need to elaborate. She understood. He was thanking her for witnessing, for understanding, for being there for that profound moment. That night marked a turning point. Peace in the Valley didn't become a regular song in his seat list, not immediately, not in the same way his other hits were. It remained special, reserved for rare, profound moments. But when he did perform it, usually towards the end of a gospel set, it was always with that same raw emotion, that same vulnerability, and now that same profound sense of triumph. The tears would still come, but they were no longer just tears of grief. They were tears of remembrance, of love, of enduring faith, and of a hard-won peace. The song had been reclaimed. It was no longer a haunting melody, but a powerful testament to his mother's enduring spirit and to his own strength. The meaning of the song had evolved for him. It was still about Gladys, always would be, but now it was also about his journey, about confronting the deepest parts of his pain and finding a way to share it, to transform it into something beautiful and hopeful for others. He realized that his vulnerability wasn't a weakness. It was a bridge, connecting him more deeply to his audience, allowing them to see the man behind the legend, the human heart that beat beneath the gold lame and rhinestones. For Sarah, that night became a cornerstone of her experience in music. It wasn't just about the notes or the harmonies. It was about the power of music to heal, to connect, to express the most profound human emotions. She carried the memory of Elvis's performance, the raw honesty of it, into her own career, inspiring her to seek out the deeper meaning in every song she sang. She learned that true artistry wasn't about perfection, but about connection, about bearing your soul and trusting that others would understand. Elvis Presley, the king, continued to electrify audiences worldwide. But from that night on, there was an added dimension to his performances, a profound depth that few entertainers ever achieved. He was still the showman, still the icon, but he was also the man who had walked through the valley of shadows and emerged singing of peace, sharing his most sacred song with a world that was forever changed by his voice and by the courage of his human heart. The peace he had found in the valley was not just for himself, but a lasting legacy he left for all.